everyone, my name's Florence and welcome back to my channel. Today we're in a completely different location because we're down at my parents' house. So this is their garden, and next to me here is 18-and-a-half-year-old Gimli, who is a Jack Russell Cross Yorkshire Terrier. Now, if you're following me on Instagram, you would have seen my poll, and a lot of you asked, I think it was about 70 of you asked for a self-watering moss pole tutorial. So that's what we're doing here today. And I'll just go through with you quickly what I'm going to use. I'm going to do some stuff off camera just so that it's easier because it's a two-person job, and I'll explain everything that I'm doing step by step in this video. So all I've got here is some PVC pipe and a connector because I couldn't get a cap which was large enough to fit in. So I've just got a connector which I'll tape here and stop it in there, and then that will go into the pot. And it's really important, actually, before we start, just to remember that you want some of the moss to start higher up as you want to put this in your pot, and then that way it will be completely unaffected by the roots in the pot and it won't stay wet or rot. This is another reason why I'm using PVC. I'm not using wood or any cocoa because it does tend to rot if you water your plant. And obviously if it's sat in wet soil, it's just going to collapse completely. I've also got some cotton thread here, which you can use candle wick as long as it's completely cotton and not man-made material. It just needs to be super absorbent. I've actually just cut strips of this sheet off and I'm using that. You need some cable ties, and also I prefer plastic mesh because metal will tend to rust. So that's another thing to bear in mind. The last thing you need today is some sphagnum moss. This is just to absorb any water and so that the aerial roots can really cling into this pole. The reason that you might want a pole is just because the leaves are getting small on your trailing plant. It's wanting to climb as it would naturally in the wild. And you'll find that once you give it a pole, and especially a self-watering pole, when those aerial roots can really draw up moisture, you can get incredible specimens which grow to an incredible height, and this is how I do it. So I've just taped this attachment onto this pipe here. I've made sure that it's completely sterile, so I've sprayed it and washed it off. And what you can do is you can get attachments which screw into each other. That means that you can glue the attachment into the pot and screw the pipe on, so that way if you ever need to change the pot that it's in or anything like that, you're not having to peel up a glued pot and untwist it, and you can just shove it in a different pot. So I've got my plastic mesh, and all I'm going to do is wrap it round a few times, maybe 1.5, because I want about 1/2 inch of moss in there, and then that's where I'm going to cut it. So I'll just trim this quickly. I'll fast forward here. Okay, so like I said, you need to leave some gap at the bottom, so this is the gap that I've left, and that will go straight into the soil. That way you're not using unnecessary moss. It will be a bit more balanced because you can really pack the soil in, and the plant can start to climb as soon as it comes out of the soil onto this. So the next thing that I'm going to do is cut my cotton strips and feed them through. Now, you want to make sure that you've got excess of this coming out the bottom of the pipe so that you can trim it to the right size at the end once it's all fed through. Okay, so now that they're threaded through, I've got a lot at the end which I'm going to tie into a knot, but as you can see, these little bits of string that are coming down will act as water absorption up through the pipe, come all the way down and wet the sphagnum moss as the water seeps down into the string. So next off, we get our mesh wire and we place a layer of sphagnum on the bottom. Today I'm going to be using Gardman fresh sphagnum moss. That was all that there was at my local garden centre, and it does tend to have quite a few fungus gnats, so I don't recommend this for people who struggle with fungus gnats. And I will do a new video soon on how to get rid of fungus gnats. So all that I'm going to do now is just make sure that the bit that I'm laying on the moss is flat and that the strings are in the right place. And I'm going to cover that now with sphagnum as well. I like to make sure there's a thick layer of sphagnum over the pole so that I can't see any of this white PVC pipe. And also it's much better if you've got dry sphagnum moss to be using wet sphagnum, so make sure it's damp before you try and work with it. Just make sure that no patches of the PVC pipe are showing. It's better to use more moss than less, in my opinion. And the next step is a bit tricky. You might need 2 people to do this, but I'm going to attempt it on my own. I've got really large cable ties here, which I'm going to slide underneath and form a circle, basically a sausage roll, with this moss pole. So as you can see, I've just used big cable ties to cable this in place. And what we're going to do now is we're going to tie all of the little bits together, just using smaller, more fine cable ties. You can see that the bit of string that I've put out is still here, and in the top they're just dangling over the edge, more or less in thirds, and that will bring all of the moisture down through the moss. So I know a lot of people buy moss poles from plant shops or pet shops or anywhere that is possible. I think in total this one will cost me around £7. Okay, so now the pole looks like this. It means that it's all being cable tied together. What I am going to do is I'm just going to do one last massive cable tie at the bottom, just so that no moss falls out into the pot. And then I'm just going to tidy up all of these cable ties. I'm going to snip the large ones off. They were just to hold it in place whilst I was cable tying, and I'll show you after. And here we have the moss pole. So what I've done is I've just wrapped it completely all the way round. These impressions from the larger cable ties will come through and raise up, so I'm not worried about that at all. This will obviously be hidden at the back, but it's still not as bad as a lot of the cocoa poles that you find. I've trimmed the top just to make sure that it's completely even. And before putting the cap on the bottom of this, I'll obviously trim these off, make sure that the cotton is completely damp, and plug it. Then what I'll do is I'll glue the bottom plug into the pot, and then the soil can go up to there. And then what I will do is I will water in here. That will fill up. I'll probably only fill up about that much. And that should last about a week, dampening all of the moss so that aerial roots and plants can climb up these perfectly with the help of my dad. So what I've done in other designs, I've drilled in holes here all the way up and used different lengths of twine or cotton to absorb the water up through there. I'll keep you all updated as to which is my favourite design. I really don't get on with the cocoa ones that you get in shops, and I just find them massively overpriced. I really hope that was helpful for you. I'll put in some clips of it in situ and show you which plant that I've chosen to put this pole into. Okay, so I've got both of my moss poles set up, one which is the string coming all the way down and the other one which is the strings coming through. I'll just touch on this one first. So this one is the one where the strings come down through, and I've got my Raphidophora producer set up on this. It's been on here for about a week, and I can say that all of the aerial roots, bar maybe one of the nose, has gone straight into the moss. I water this through the top, so that works really well. And I'm not sure if you can see, but there is actually water in there still. It's probably lasted about a week and a half since last watering, and the moss is still fairly damp. And I made some adjustments which I'll touch on quickly. So I said earlier about using tape and put a little note on the screen saying not to. I did try out Gorilla Tape and that didn't work so well. Water did just leak out through the bottom, so I ended up going to get these waste pipe caps, which you just screw onto the bottom, and that's worked really well. I mean, you can see here that the moisture is not coming through the soil. It needs a good water actually. And they have completely flat bottoms, so it's very easy to glue in. Just because I didn't want to make these again, I did end up using this kind of putty stuff. It's basically like super glue putty and firms up after it's been exposed to air. So that worked really well. I'm sure you can just use super glue, or you can use the screw-in connectors that I mentioned earlier. But this has worked incredibly well. It's grown 2 new leaves since being on here, so I'm really hopeful about that. The other one is the Rhaphidophora foraminifera. Now this looks a bit dodgy because it got burnt in the sun. And this is the one where the strings come up and I've drilled holes through, so there's different lengths of string. I don't think this one works as well, purely because the bottom hole comes too soon for the moss to get wet all the way through. So water does tend to seep out, so I've had to be really careful about not overwatering this. And then when I spray it as well, water does tend to drip down. So definitely stick with the method that I've done in this video. And yeah, I'll keep you guys updated, obviously, as to how much these grow. That's it for this week's video. If you found this video useful, please give it a thumbs up. If you have any questions or comments, please leave them down below. Like I said, Gimli is here with me today, but you can see more of him over on my Instagram. If you haven't already, please do subscribe, it means a lot. And if you found any of this useful, tag me in any pictures of any polls that you make. Look at that snuggle too.